You ever notice how every time someone says the Jedi are wise and noble, they immediately do something unbelievably stupid? Like, yes, let's give a lightsaber to a teenager with anger issues, and then tell him he's not allowed to feel anything ever. What could possibly go wrong with that plan? It's almost like they wanted to create villains, just so they'd have someone to fight in their free time. And don't even get me started on their whole no attachments rule, because apparently love is the fastest path to the dark side. But war crimes are totally fine, as long as you meditate afterward. These are the same people who raised kids from birth, told them emotions were evil, and then threw them straight into galactic war like. Have fun out there. Don't get too attached to your clone troopers who are literally dying for you. The more you think about it, the more the Jedi sound like that one group project member who insists they're the leader, but never actually does anything useful. They walk around acting like they're above politics, while sitting in a fancy council chamber, giving advice to politicians. They act like emotionless monks, but get riled up over the pettiest nonsense. Meanwhile, Palpatine's right there, plotting a coup in broad daylight, and they're too busy worrying about whether Anakin had a bad dream. And the funniest part is how shocked they are when everything falls apart. Like, wow, you mean isolating people, ignoring their trauma, and pretending feelings don't exist, leads to disaster? Who would have guessed? It's almost like every decision they made was a carefully curated step towards self-destruction. If they weren't so tragic, they'd be the galaxy's biggest comedy act. But here's the thing. As much as I want to laugh at them, I also can't help but feel a little bit of rage about how their stubbornness ruined everything. They were supposed to be the guardians of peace, not the reason it all came crashing down. And every time I watch them lecture Anakin about fear, I want to yell, hey, maybe listen to your own advice before the Republic literally explodes around you. In this video, we're going to break down the number one thing that makes the Jedi so frustrating. How their obsession with emotional detachment turned them from protectors into enablers of chaos. And why their entire downfall wasn't just inevitable, but completely avoidable. Because if there's one lesson to take from the Jedi, it's this: being powerful means nothing if you don't know how to care. Okay, so, the Jedi Order. Keepers of peace. Defenders of balance. Space monks with glowing laser swords and a strict no-fun policy. On paper, they sound like the perfect moral compass for a galaxy, always 2 seconds away from falling into chaos. But the more you dig into them, the more you start to see cracks in the robes. Because behind all the talk about serenity and detachment, there's something off about the way they operate. They claim to love peace, but lead armies. They warn against fear, but hide in fear of feelings. They preach compassion, but ban attachment. Like those two things are somehow mutually exclusive. And that's the part that always makes me pause. The Jedi weren't corrupt in the obvious ways. They weren't evil or greedy, but they were stubborn, rigid, and somehow completely blind to the consequences of their own beliefs, which is weird, considering they're literally supposed to sense things before they happen. They didn't fall because they were weak. They fell because they refused to change. They built this entire moral code around the idea that feelings are dangerous, and that emotional distance equals strength, and in the process, they completely lost touch with the very thing they were trying to protect humanity. So here's the question. What happens when an order built on wisdom becomes so obsessed with control that they can't even recognize the danger sitting right in front of them? Because that's not just a plot point, it's a massive philosophical failure. Here's what drives me absolutely crazy about the Jedi. They acted like emotions were some kind of virus that needed to be quarantined. Like the moment you cared too much or felt too deeply, you were already halfway down the path to the dark side. It's like they thought the Force was allergic to feelings. You've got Jedi Masters giving lectures about attachment being dangerous, while simultaneously ignoring the fact that war, trauma, and isolation are just as destructive. Yoda basically tells Anakin not to mourn his mother. Just let go, feel nothing, and maybe go meditate about it for a few hours. Like, yeah, sure buddy, that'll fix everything. It's honestly no surprise that so many Jedi ended up breaking down or going rogue. They weren't allowed to love, to grieve, to form meaningful bonds. They were trained to be walking emotionless lightsaber machines and expected to somehow maintain peace and justice across an entire galaxy while bottling up every human instinct they had. And this is where it starts to really hurt, because once you realize how deeply broken the Jedi's emotional philosophy was, you start to see how much pain it caused, not just for them, but for everyone around them. They weren't just blind, they were cold, and that coldness left people like Anakin completely alone. Anakin didn't turn because he was power-hungry. He turned because he was terrified, grieving, desperate to protect the people he loved. And the Jedi's only answer was silence, meditation, detachment. They didn't offer him help. They offered him denial. And in doing so, they left him wide open to the only person who did show understanding: Palpatine. Ahsoka felt it too. pushed to the edge by an order that saw her more as a symbol than a person. And when she walked away, it wasn't out of rebellion, it was out of heartbreak. Because even after everything she gave, they couldn't trust her when it mattered. They couldn't feel what she felt. And then there's all the unnamed Jedi, the ones who fought, who died, who followed the code and still fell anyway. Because when you strip away humanity in the name of enlightenment, you end up with soldiers instead of protectors, machines instead of mentors, ghosts instead of guides. The tragedy of the Jedi isn't just that they were destroyed, it's that they forgot who they were long before the clones ever turned their blasters. But here's the thing. For all their flaws, the Jedi still carried something powerful, something ancient. There's a reason they were respected, feared, even idolized. They had a connection to the Force that was real, transcendent. They touched something eternal, even if they didn't always understand it. Watching a Jedi in action, you can feel the weight of that legacy. Qui-Gon meditating in battle, Obi-Wan standing on Mustafar with heartbreak in his voice, Luke refusing to kill Vader and tossing away his weapon. These are moments that feel big, not because of power, but because of choice. There's something awe-inspiring about their discipline, their skill, their ability to stand calm in the middle of chaos. It's not the detachment that makes them great tits, what they almost become in spite of it. The moments when emotion breaks through, and suddenly, you see the Jedi they could have been. When Ahsoka walks into battle with clarity, when Kanan sacrifices himself for his crew, when Rey chooses healing over violence, those are the glimpses of a better Jedi. One not built on fear of feeling, but on strength through connection. And it's those moments, those flashes of true harmony, that remind you what the Jedi could represent. Not guardians of detachment, but warriors of empathy. And that's where the future comes in. Because the Jedi as we knew them may have fallen, but their story didn't end in that temple. It kept going, through survivors, through rebels, through people who learned from the failures and tried to build something better. Ahsoka found a new path. Not Jedi, not Sith, but something more balanced, more human. Luke tried to stumbling through his own mistakes, but always pushing toward understanding, toward connection. Rey takes that torch and does what none of them could, embracing her power and her emotion without apology. Grogu represents that shift too. A being trained in the old ways who chooses love, who doesn't have to sever connection to grow stronger. The galaxy isn't asking for perfect monks anymore. It's asking for leaders who feel, who listen, who care deeply, and fight fiercely. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. The Force was never meant to be locked behind doctrine. It was meant to flow through life, through relationships, through emotion. The next generation doesn't need detachment. It needs courage. The kind that comes from feeling everything and choosing to rise anyway. There's still hope for what the Jedi can become, if they're willing to let go of what broke them in the first place. But we have to face the truth. The Jedi didn't fall because of a surprise attack or overwhelming force. They fell because they let their fear of emotion become policy. They confused detachment with wisdom, and in doing so, they lost the very people they were sworn to protect, including themselves. They taught children to bury their love, ignore their pain, suppress their instincts, and then acted surprised when those same children turned bitter, unstable, broken. It wasn't just Anakin. It was every Jedi who ever felt something real and was told to push it away. That's the tragedy. Not that they failed, but that their failure was avoidable. They could have changed. They had every opportunity. But they clung to a philosophy that treated emotion like a weakness, instead of what it actually is. A strength they were too afraid to trust. And now, the Jedi are scattered, remembered more for how they fell than how they lived. Not because they weren't powerful, but because they refused to evolve. Their downfall wasn't a twist of fate. It was a consequence of fear masquerading as discipline. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy my videos, please consider looking at my pinned comment and checking out the links for my Amazon storefront. It contains my favorite Legos, my gear in which I make videos, and comics that I read on a daily basis. I update it constantly, so please, take a moment and click on the link. On top of that, check out my second channel, Critical Analysis Hub Plus, and my third channel, Critical Analysis Hub XP. Just one click would go on a long way in supporting my channels and future in YouTube.